So getting into volume 4 of the Eminence in Shadow, this is one of those volumes that kind of really made things quite interesting in the actual world itself, and it actually reminds me more and more and more of Overlord, which is rather funny because when I first spoke about the Eminence in Shadow, when the anime first came out and I started getting into the light novels, I mentioned how it gave me a lot of vibes of Overlord. And it wasn't for the reasons in this particular volume, it was more to do with the outlandishness, the fun, the overpowered, and the way that the girls, like particularly Beta, looks at Shadow or Sid in this sort of awe of godlike powers and where they can do no wrong, even when he goes out there and he does something, and even if it's like it accidentally doesn't go the way he wants, it just, everything falls into place perfectly the way he would probably end up wanting it to if he knew that was the outcome. And it's so fun to see that play out. And that's why I kind of looked at the two similar. It was like, if you love the humor that's in Overlord and the characters and the Floor Guardians and the way they look at Irons and worship him and everything he says, they kind of just wait on bated breath to understand the true, deep, dark wisdom that is going on with him. It's similar in that sense. But the thing that shocked me even more was this whole, I wouldn't really call it multiverse, but just the realm system and how these realms kind of match together. Now, this isn't exactly like how Overlord is, but there are some similarities in, for example, of how a certain individual in this was talking about with the actual girls themselves, because they were questioning him, saying about how the worlds can kind of collide and things kind of seep in between. And then it talks about how the world itself that they're in never had magic. And so magic was sort of introduced into this world, and then the dragons ran into this problem and then slowly became more and more and more declining in numbers, which reminds me of Overlord. Overlord's concept of a story is that magic was introduced into this world, and so it overthrew kind of the original balance that was in place with the dragons, and thus the people itself became much more stronger, and then dragons became, their power, which is the wild magic, became very less valued. It just had some similarities. Now, I'm not saying it's a complete one-to-one as far as like Overlord and the Eminence, but there's just some interesting correlation. There's just some interesting strings that you can pull there and be like, hey, these are kind of similar, but still very different in how they approach the story itself. So again, don't mistake me saying it's identically the same. No. I'm just saying that there are some interesting similarities that you can draw to, and I just think that's really fun and interesting because both of them try to make light of the isekai genre, in my opinion. I've always seen that from Overlord, is that was what its job was, to make light of it, while also being a fun story as well, with overpowered protagonists and the balance between good and evil. But with Sid or Shadow, there's kind of this balance of like reality and him pretending to be this fictional character in his mind, but actually reality does call in that, hey, these things are a real problem. And so honestly, this volume is amazing. So getting at the start of it, you basically get brought up with Rose, which is 666, and how she finds out about, in her mind, she believes her mother has been abducted and is kidnapped and is being used as hostage, so that she has to marry Perv. And so she agrees to that. Some of the girls believe she's betrayed, but in reality, the mother is actually all on board with this, and that's what I mean by, like, she's been deceived in believing that her mother is kidnapped and being used as hostage, but Perv is... I'm not sure if he really is into the mother, but the mother is clearly into him, and their whole plan was to basically get rid of the king, get rid of Rose, and then take over the kingdom for themselves and basically run things the way they wanted to run. And then of course they were kind of in cahoots with the Diablo cult itself, or particularly Perv was. She wasn't, or she was kind of playing along, should I say. And so it was just really interesting to see how that got brought in, how Sid ended up playing along with this little game that he was just kind of adding in, and then he ends up stealing the ring from Perv and ended up accidentally giving it to Rose. He didn't really give it, he just left it on the table, and then she thought it was a wedding ring because he's playing along with this other game in his own mind, and she thinks it's this deep love confession where he learned music so that he could get close to her and whisk her away to safety. And it's just really funny the way Rose is falling more and more and more and more in love with him, thinking that he's doing all these things for her, but in reality it's a completely different objective that he was trying to accomplish. And that's what I mean about like the similarities between Overlord and Eminence. Ainz always tried to do things in a certain way, never really quite went the way he planned, but somehow it still kind of turned out in his benefit, and everyone interpreted it as like this grandeur plan, and always these fun misunderstandings. Now, as things go on, the wedding kind of plays out. There's this whole ceremony. She's meant to say, hey, I agree, but she ends up declining it. She wears the ring, and then this holographic thing comes up, and it blows the whole confession out. Basically, what really happened, the king, and basically her inheriting the throne. And what I thought was interesting, it called back to the particular volume and showed that, hey, right when she killed him and thrusted the blade in him, he basically is like, I hand the kingdom off to you, it's up to you now. And I thought that was a really nice touch, because it shows that I think the king knew at some point he was going to get killed, and I think he was more happy that his daughter was the one that did it, rather than someone else getting their grotty hands on him and being the one that got the final enjoyment out of taking his life. It was her that did what was needed to put him out of his misery, and I think it hurt even more when she found out her mother was the one behind it along with Perv. Things just, it got very heated for that situation, and I kind of really do feel sorry for her, because it's a lot of responsibility thrusted on her shoulder. So that ring itself was the ring of succession, which was meant to be for Perv to use as a way of, the name itself is self-explanatory, ring of succession. So she rejects it, things play out, and then this new guy kind of comes in, not really new guy, but new big villain part of the whole table itself, higher up, that comes in and ends up kind of causing some chaotic situations. And this is where the whole realm situation comes in, where there's these monsters coming out, Sid's off somewhere else defeating the big bad Ragnarok, which was just funny itself. But when you understand that this whole realm, the merging between different, and time also functions differently as well, and I'll get into why, because this is where the big fun stuff really gets in, and this explains how Sid was able to go from Japan to this world. It's clear that these realms have different timelines, they're like different alternates, they all kind of mash together, and it's like, imagine, I wouldn't say they like crash together like two planets like smashing like toy blocks or something and they just break apart, but more like they phase in and they kind of bleed into each other. So magic from one realm can bleed into another, monsters from another can bleed into another, and so there's these kind of mishmashes. There could be the possibility that they do just, there's these situations where two planets, or they could just completely collide and blow each other up, but I don't think that's really the objective. But all of the fights that happened at that point after the wedding ceremony played out. Super fun to see Shadow just showing his stuff again, absolutely obliterating and learning more about the lore of the world. Honestly, I'm getting more interested in it. In the first couple of volumes, I wasn't as interested. I was just more interested in the girls and Sid. But now the story and the lore's building up, and it's kind of becoming a little bit more intriguing, especially with a portal that opened where Beta and him go through it and they're back in Japan. That was a bit of a shock. I did not see that. And you know what? I commend the Eminence and the Shadow community for not spoiling that. It was so fun to read that and be like, oh my god, that's a big surprise for me, because so many light novel series, so many animes where, you know, the first season comes out and people just dump spoilers from like 4, 6, 8, 10, 20 volumes down the line. And because Eminence and the Shadow are quite thick, meaty volumes, it's a lot of stuff that goes on in it. I'm just honestly surprised someone didn't drop that as a spoiler. But I'm so happy it didn't, because it was just so cool to see Beta and Sid go back to Japan, but time had passed on. And it's basically, Japan is this post-apocalyptic place where there's these monsters. So the bleeding effect, that's what I mean, the way they kind of bleed these dimensions. And so he ends up bumping into a certain girl that was introduced in the first episode of the anime, which they have the chapter in here. So the reason why I'm bringing it up is because with season 1 of the series, in the first episode, it actually takes some parts from volume 4, which is one particular chapter which explains a character that plays a role in this, and her name is Akane, and she's a student that ends up having an interest in him, but basically he dies, so she kind of just figured, you know, sadly she didn't get to know him better, because she kind of thought he was weird. and then she ended up saving him. So for those that have watched the anime, the first episode, this is where it actually happens. It's a chapter that happens in volume 4, which is actually really smart that they did this, because they kind of focus on like the Japan aspect of it, and then him getting transported, and then clearly later on, if it happens in season 2 or season 3, this is where they're going to showcase this part, but they'll skip over that because you'll be like, oh, I remember that chick from episode 1. And so he ends up meeting her in Japan, that she's part of a night group where she's been enhanced. She's defeating these monsters, and they have these interactions with other characters. There's a lot of drama going on, power struggles, because I mean everything's chaotic in Japan with this sort of post-apocalyptic. And I think what just kind of got me more interested was the interactions between Beta, Sid, and her, because of course she now knows who Sid is, and that was only because when she ended up getting kidnapped again, he saves her as Shadow, and then says to her, basically, in paraphrasing, I hope you don't get kidnapped again, which basically was a dead giveaway that she knew, oh my god, it's him. And then Beta goes, oh, I can't take all these electronics with me back to the current world. I know, I'll take her with me. She can teach me how these things can be made. And so that was just a really fun way of introducing her permanently into the story. Like, I was always wondering how she would be introduced, because I watched, season 1, so I knew that chapter from the early stages, but seeing how it was properly introduced, it just, a lot of good surprises, I will say that. And I liked their interactions, especially with the fact that Sid knew the language and everything, and Beta's kind of, again, interpreting it in a way of being like, oh my god, he's so wise, he picked up the language so quickly and the technology. But she picked up on the technology as well too. But I mean, you can just observe what other people do and go from there. So now you have this character that's been enhanced, she's got a connection to Sid, and she also knows his secret of who he used to be. So I'm really curious now to see where volume 5 and 6 go, because those are the two that are still released in Japan that haven't been given an English translation yet, where the story goes, because now she's a permanent part of the story. I want to know what their interactions are like. Will she be part of the Shadow organization with Sid, or will she have her own thing, or will it be a bit of a hybrid between the two? Like, there's so many possibilities of where the story can go, and I just am so excited for it. There's just so many cool things in this particular volume. Really looking forward to how it plays out in the anime, because as I said in my previous videos, as much as I love the light novels, and I really do enjoy reading the light novels, seeing the anime is just a whole different experience that I really love as well. And I'm just so excited to see how this plays out in the anime, because it's just, yeah, it's mind-blowing. It's so much fun. Really loving the story, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What did you think of this volume? Definitely will be talking about more Eminence in the Shadow on the channel, so definitely stay subscribed, stay tuned, and of course I do a variety of other content as well. You know me, I love talking about anime, light novels, you name it. So again, if you like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.